about the barbecue?
Appreciate everybody sticking around. I'm sure everybody's anxious to get home, but just know Bill mentioned this last week, but just culmination of a lot of work by a lot of different people throughout the course of the year, starting with Monty and his staff. There's obviously a lot of time, a lot of effort that goes into this exercise. Still have a lot of work to do in front of us. 11 picks tomorrow. So ended up kind of sitting where we were there at 32 and making the pick with Harry. The receiver from Arizona State. Productive player over a 3-year period. Played for a couple different coaches. Played for Coach Graham for a couple years, and then Coach Edwards came in. But he's been a pretty productive player in their system. Big, strong receiver. Good hands. Go with the ball after the catch. So we had a chance to play against some decent people out in the Pac-12. So, we'll get him out here and try to get him in a program and get him moving. The expectation will be no different than it is for any other players to come in and just kind of get started, build a foundation, and then, go from there. So I think that's really the focus more than anything else. Anything beyond that is a little much. So, but, right now we're positioned to have the 5 picks tomorrow. We'll see how it goes. Certainly some opportunities could be there to potentially move around a little bit. We do have a little flexibility relative to the picks, so we'll evaluate the board, we'll evaluate the situation, the opportunities that are there, and try to make good decisions here over the next couple of days. So definitely plenty of work to do, but we're off to a decent start, and we'll see how it goes.
Nick, what did you learn about him when he came to visit you in one of the pre-draft visits here?
Yeah, that's part of the process. So, that was one of the different checkpoints. We had some other interactions with him, but, he came in and, presented himself well, a pretty mature kid, seems like a pretty smart kid. So obviously, I'd say all these players, regardless of where they come from, how much experience they have, it's an enormous transition that they're about to undertake on a lot of levels. Not only the playing level is a part of it, but honestly, some of the other things, non-football related, just as it relates to routine, consistency, day after day after day. They're behind, obviously, relative to the rest of our players who 2 weeks in the off-season program, a lot of whom have actually been training prior to that. So most of these players, wherever they come from, have essentially been on their own for, let's call it, the last 2 to 3 months, probably without a real program that they've been following. So that'll be the biggest transition or adjustment initially, is just getting in and establishing a routine on a day-to-day basis. And it's a slow process. It takes time. Nothing's going to happen overnight. So the goal, whether it's Harry or the players that we pick over the next couple of days, is to really get them ready for training camp, because that's what they need. They need to get caught up to at least have a chance to be competitive with the rest of the group, because really that's what it is. They're behind everybody. That's the reality of it, and they have an opportunity to catch up, and we'll see if they can do that when they get here.
Nick, Bill was really candid about the differences in the college passing game and the NFL, day and night. How sophisticated was the Arizona State offense? Did the field play under, and how quickly did he seem to be as a guy? How quickly does he seem to pick up process?
Yeah, I would say, look, whatever system they played in at this point, it's kind of irrelevant, because nothing necessarily is going to transfer over, regardless of how extensive the system that they played in, whatever the terminology or whatever the philosophy or the schematics are. So the big thing will be just to focus on our system and give the players something that they can handle, and then see as you move along through the process how much they can handle, and the more they can handle, the more you can give them. So the biggest adjustment, which Bill alluded to, is just the volume, and we've talked about this previously, especially that position, the volume of coverages and the techniques at the corners that you're gonna play against. And look, you're probably playing against 1 or 2 decent players on the perimeter, like every week. It's Tremaine Johnson, it's White, it's Minka Fitzpatrick, Xavier, Howard. So there's just different going to be combinations. So it's the same thing for a tackle, trying to block. You're blocking Wake, you're blocking Jerry Hughes, which you might have seen one of those guys during your season. Now you're going to see him every week. So
can he go inside too at all?
As far as
he's just a bigger guy at 6'2", almost 6'3".
Right. He moved around the formation a little bit. So we'll see how it goes. We'll start him at one spot and then see wherever that goes from there.
Can you get a pretty good gauge on how they pick things up during the visit, and can you test them a little bit on that?
Yeah, I would say with all the players that on both sides of the ball, it's pretty extensive. We try to simulate a little bit of what they're going to go through when they get here, kind of in a rookie minicamp situation. Something that we do when we go on the road and visit with players. Try to go through a little bit of installation, teach them our system. We tell them, look, this is probably like 1/10 of what you're actually going to get, when you get here. So you at least have a baseline foundation and a starting point. So we try to do the same things, consistent with every player's, really at all positions. And we try to simulate what that process would be: meeting, installation, walkthrough, learn the material, come back, see what they retain. So that's the big thing. And for us, just as a team, once we get into the season, we're such a game plan specific team that the game plan changes each week. So, like what we did in the Super Bowl, how we played defensively was different than how we played at different points. So having the players that have that mental flexibility and the mental adaptability, throughout the team gives us, that's one of the things that, we found has been beneficial. So trying to find players that may have some of those qualities, regardless of the position that they play is important.
You guys hadn't taken a wide receiver in the first round since Bill came in 2000, so what was it about Harry that just made you guys buck that trend, I guess?
Yeah, we're not really concerned about what's happened in the past. I think we looked at this year's group of players across the board, and then we stack the players obviously horizontally and vertically, and then we work across. So, it's the same thing we did with Sony last year, when we drafted Sony at the bottom of the first round. So he was a good player. He was a highly graded player. So relative to what are the options that we were looking at, that was the choice that we made. So whatever happens in the past really has no bearing, because it has no relevance to this year, what's happening last year or years past.
Drew Lock was there at 32. Was he a guy you anticipated seeing when you got on board, and was he a consideration for you?
Yeah, there's a lot of players. You go through different scenarios and try to take the information that you have and try to maybe pinpoint where a player is going to end up. So I'd say a lot of players that are in that category. So there's certainly a number of good football players that are left up there. So we'll kind of recalibrate here where we are tonight and tomorrow morning, and then kind of get ready to go for tomorrow.
There are a lot of talented receivers that were on the board at 32. There's 32 still on the board now. What kind of separated Harry from that group? What made him more attractive to you than maybe some of these other guys that are still up there?
He's been a productive player. He has some physical attributes that, are important to that position. So, there's some other good players that are up there as well. So we just thought this is the player that made the most sense for us at the time.
Was it close between he and some of the other guys you had there?
As far as?
Just like, for instance, he or A.J. Brown, if you go say they over Paris.
Yeah, look, we can only pick one player. So, we set the board up, and then we picked the player that we think makes the most sense, and that's what we did.
There was some trade action at both picks right before you. How did that sort of affect you guys in the room in terms of making the pick you did?
Not necessarily. There were some, I would say, phone calls, a little bit there at the end, but it really didn't have any relevance or bearing. Wasn't necessarily going to affect kind of what we were going to do. There's some other things that we were working on kind of separately. So, in the end, we decided the best thing for us was to pick, and that's what we did.
How valuable is the ability to make contested catches? Nick, Harry's not necessarily the fastest guy, according to 40 times at that position this year, but does he maybe have a little bit more value than some others because of his ability to make catches in tight spots?
Yeah, every player has a skill set and attributes that are specific to them. Some players have certain qualities. I would say one of the things that he does well is he plays the ball in the air. So, I'd say the coverage in this league is tight, regardless of the type of player, receiver that you are. The coverage is tight. So you're going to have to make some plays in some tight quarters. Receivers have to do it, tight ends have to do it. James White has to, I know he plays running back, but he's involved in the passing game. So the coverages the windows are smaller, the catches are going to be more contested. So, if a player has the ability to do that, that's maybe one of his strengths, one of Rob's strengths. He can make contested catches. So, everybody has something that they do well, or that their skill set is different than somebody else. So, they have to maximize whatever attributes they have, and that's what, you hope that they do.
When you mentioned the horizontal versus vertical draft board, and hopefully this isn't too redundant, But how much of it was Harry being the best player available versus wanting to really target a receiver this early in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, our whole philosophy, Jeff, is just to try to pick good football players, right? Regardless of where they come from, how they get here, what position that they play. I mean, that's what we care about. It doesn't really matter the position that they play. You just try to pick good players and however they get on your team and just put them in a position where they have a chance to be competitive with, the other players that are here. So ultimately, that's what we're most concerned about.
Nick, understanding you're preparing for multiple scenarios, did the first round as a whole and towards the end unfold as you would expect? Was there any part of it that was a surprise?
Yeah, I mean, I would say at this point, nothing's really a surprise. I mean, I think each team has their own philosophy of what they're trying to do or what they want to do, and they have to, put the resources and the time and picks into those players. So, I mean, there's nothing that's really surprising. I mean, you just try to go through a process and try to have some anticipation of where you think players are going to get picked, or, okay, if the player doesn't get picked here, what's the likelihood of your next selection, maybe that player not being there or being there. So those are all some of the things that go into, the bigger picture. So some of it's supply and demand, some of it can be some other factors. So you just take all that information and just try to make the best assessment that you can presently, and then just you make the best decision for our club.
You could boil it down. What does Harry have to do to have success here in New England in this program?
Show up, work hard, take coaching, and just try to improve each day. I mean, honestly, that's a formula for every player. Like, if you do that, that's it. It's not that hard. I mean, it seems pretty simple, but it's not that hard. But if you do those things, if you show up, you work hard, develop a routine, have good habits, you get into a day-to-day, your consistent day-to-day, and you take coaching, you improve, you're probably going to become a decent player. If you don't do those things, it's probably not going to go too well for you. So,
You mentioned that one of Rob's strengths was making contested catches. Was it important for you guys as a team to add a player with that skill set? Because Rob's obviously no longer here. Josh's status is sort of up in the air. He was that kind of player.
Yeah, I would say, look, a receiver's got two jobs: get open and catch a ball. I mean, that's plain and simple. So if a guy can do that, however they do it, then that's what they need to do. So, that's in the end, not to keep it like very, simple, but two jobs: get open, catch a ball. So however they do that, then they have to find a way to do that.
Is he the guy who's open even if he's not because of that contested catch ability?
Well, look, in the end, you have to be able to play the ball and make a play on the ball. So how he does it might be different than how somebody else does it, but in the end, the passing game is contingent upon a number of different things, and the receiver's got a couple of jobs, and if he can do that, then, he can play in our offense. If he can't, then he probably won't.
Looking ahead to tomorrow, you mentioned the picks, 56, 64, 73.
73, 97, 101, something like that, yeah.
Knowing what you know about this class, this draft, how excited are you for what you guys can accomplish?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely some good players that are left here, so I think we'll work through it. I think there's some players that we like, that I think we're going to like, and we have some flexibility. Maybe if there's a player that we think we need to target a little bit earlier, we could potentially go up and get them. If not, we can kind of sit back and pick. So we'll look at it, but I would say there's certainly groups of players in some positions maybe have a little more depth than others. So we'll just have to look at it relative to where we think we are as a team. So it should be interesting.
Can you compare Nikhil's skill set to any current past NFL players?
Yeah, I would say it's not really something that we get into. It's not fair to the player, and it's not fair to the veteran players, other players that are playing in the league. So, honestly, each player has his own dynamics and his own attributes, and it's important for them to focus on that, not necessarily like how they compare to somebody else. That's not really something that we spend, too much time on, because it's kind of irrelevant.
This is getting way out in the weeds, but have you ever looked into what would happen if the clock ran out on 32? Like, how would that scenario play?
It's a great question. We actually we talked about that before the draft, like what were to happen, because however many years ago that was, right? The clock ran out, and then it went to the next team. So you still have to you don't have the ability to do that anymore. So it runs out. Eventually, you have to pick. So like you've got to figure out something to do. You can't. Clock runs out. Like nobody's going to trade. So you have to make the pick. So it's a great question, but if you do it, I mean, you could wait till tomorrow morning, like, could we wait till 7 o'clock tomorrow to make the pick? The league probably wouldn't like that, but at some point, we probably have to do something, so.
Could Arizona jump you, or?
No, that's what I mean, like, they can't, that whole rule, when that happened, I think it was Baltimore and Minnesota, it may have been somebody like that. Yeah, whatever it was, and they jumped in front of them, like, that's been eliminated, like, eventually you gotta make a decision, so.
Doesn't part of you just want to watch the world burn, though?
No, nobody'd be too happy about that, so. Yeah.
You mentioned the two coaches that he played for, and Bill's spoken about his respect for Coach Graham in the past. How much bearing did that have on the decision? And is this someone who was maybe, you mentioned 3 productive seasons, had he been on your radar as an underclassman, someone you've been able to track? Considering you guys have looked at Arizona State and skilled players.
No, it's a good question, Bob. I think once players get into the program, certainly players that play earlier in their career as freshmen, they sort of get themselves on the radar. Like Bosa, players like that who actually come in and play and have an impact. So, at some point, they're probably going to factor into the equation here. It might be sooner rather than later. You don't know that, but you're certainly cognizant of the production that they have, especially, as a younger player. So, I'd say the relationships that you have with coaches, it's part of the equation. It's not necessarily an overriding factor because you're trying to gather information from a multitude of areas and sources. So, but when you speak to the coach who's around them on a daily basis, he has some commentary about, their growth, their development, maybe where they started to where they are now. So they see them a lot more closely than we do because they're around them every day. So I would say that's one of the things that our scouts do is try to talk to people, whether or not it's the head coach, but talk with coaches, talk with other personnel, strength coaches that are around these players on a repetitive basis, so you can kind of establish some idea of like what you're dealing with. So it's not an overriding factor, but it certainly factors in the equation. We talked about it last year, like when we took Sony and Isaiah, just the program at Georgia and how Coach Smart runs it and how much respect we have, for Coach Smart. And, those coaches have been around a lot of good players. So it's a part of the equation. It's not the overriding factor, but it's certainly, a part of the evaluation.
When did Harry first land on your personal radar?
As far as?
Your first time hearing about him, watching his tape?
Yeah, well, part of our scouting process, which our actually scouts are here now, they're working on the 2020 draft as part of their spring scouting. So when we go through our spring scouting, then those players are like, whether or not, even as underclassmen, like whether or not they're actually going to come out or not. I mean, when you're watching a school of X amount of players, you're focusing on more than one player. So, I mean, I'd say he's no different than any other player that kind of goes through sort of our spring scouting process. And really, it's kind of a full year 365 cycle. So call it May to May or wherever we are right now. So during that period of time, like you're evaluating. It's not like you wait until the player declares for the draft in the case of underclassmen and like all of a sudden, we better do some work on that player. So we try to stay ahead of it as best we can. So I mean, he I would say was in the process just like however many other hundreds of players that are here, in the draft.
So you personally would have seen him last spring, it sounds like?
Probably part of it, or even maybe in some crossover film before that. So, I mean, look, who the players are in conferences and teams. So, I mean, you're working on them. I mean, look, eventually they're probably going to be involved in this process. So we can either wait until it actually becomes a reality, or we can just try to stay ahead of it, which our staff does a great job at doing that. So, I mean, that's part of our responsibility and part of our job. So, okay.
You mentioned these.
All right, last one. Yep.
You mentioned he's productive after the catch. What is it about him that allows him to be productive after the catch? Is it he's a hard guy to come down, or is it speed, agility?
Yeah, I mean, he's a strong guy. He's hard to tackle, so he actually has a little bit of, ability to just, make some people miss. So, I mean, it's one of the things that, he's been productive doing is you get the ball in his hands and he's been able to make, some yards. So we'll see if that, translates over to us here, when we get him. So, all right. I'll see you guys tomorrow night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
We'll try to get him on a conference call, but